Good morning. Sit down, keep quiet, and let's get to work. I have wielded this gavel for decades. In that time, I have looked into the eyes of every conceivable type of criminal, con artist, thief, and fool that this city can churn out. I've heard the sob stories, the elaborate lies, and the desperate backpedaling of people who thought they were smarter than the law. I do not have the patience for nonsense, and I certainly don't have the time for theatrical displays in my courtroom. If you come before me, you had better come with the truth, because I will see right through you. Before we get into today's docket, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You think you've seen it all? You haven't. Because every once in a great while, a case lands on my desk that completely shatters the routine. A case that makes me stop, take a deep breath, and remember exactly why I put this black robe on in the first place. This was one of those cases. It was a Tuesday morning, mid-October. The courtroom was already stifling, the air thick with anxiety and whispered excuses. I was burning through the docket, handing down fines and community service, completely numb to the endless parade of petty grievances. My bailiff cleared his throat and called the next file. State of New York versus Arthur Pendleton. Breaking and entering, trespassing, destruction of private property. I glanced down at the paperwork. The property in question was a foreclosed residential home, currently owned by a major national bank. The damages? A smashed back window and a torn-up floorboard. Total estimated repair cost, $850. I figured it was a standard squatter situation, maybe a teenager looking for a place to cause trouble, or a desperate scavenger trying to strip copper wire out of the walls for quick cash. Open, shut, guilty, pay the fine, next case. I expected to see a defiant kid or a habitual offender swagger up to the defendant's podium. Instead, the heavy wooden doors swung open, and the bailiff escorted in an 2-year-old man. He was wearing a faded, impeccably ironed olive green military dress jacket that hung loosely on his aging frame. He had a wooden cane in his right hand, but he didn't lean on it. He walked slowly, carefully, but he stood perfectly straight at that podium, his chin up, his eyes fixed dead ahead. He possessed the quiet, unmistakable dignity of a man who had seen the worst of war, survived it, and had long ago stopped being afraid of anything this world could throw at him. If you're new here, subscribe right now. Hit that bell, because this channel is where the cases that matter get told. Not the nonsense, not the noise, the ones that stay with you. This is one of them. Let me tell you about the man who stood before me that morning. He didn't slouch, he didn't lean on the podium. He stood at attention, a posture drilled into his bones decades ago. His olive green jacket bore the faded ribbons of a combat veteran, the fabric worn thin at the elbows but meticulously kept. His face was a map of hard years and quiet endurance, lined with deep creases, his jaw set firm. He looked like a man who had lived 3 lifetimes, carrying the weight of history on his shoulders. But in his hands, tightly gripping that wooden cane, I noticed a slight tremor, not from fear, from age, and perhaps from a deep, unseen exhaustion. I have seen thousands of people stand at that very spot. Thousands. Most of them try to perform for me. They put on a mask of fake remorse, or they cross their arms in arrogant defiance, silently daring the system to break them. This man did neither. He looked straight up at the bench, calm, resolute, and completely at peace with the fact that he was standing in a criminal courtroom. I looked down at the file, then back up at him. The discrepancy between the paperwork and the human being in front of me was jarring. Arthur Pendleton, 82 years old, no prior criminal record, not so much as a parking ticket in over 60 years. And here he was, charged with breaking and entering, and destruction of private property belonging to a national corporate bank. I adjusted my glasses. "Mr. Pendleton," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence of the room, "you are charged with smashing the back window of a foreclosed property and destroying the interior flooring, a property you have no legal right to enter. How do you plead?" He didn't look around for a lawyer. He didn't stutter or search for an excuse. "Guilty, Your Honor," he said. His voice was gravelly, a low, steady rumble that commanded immediate respect. I broke the glass. I tore up the floor. "I am completely guilty." His honesty was absolute, stripped of any pretense. His honesty was absolute, stripped of any pretense. In my courtroom, a guilty plea usually comes with a but. Guilty, but I didn't know. Guilty, but it was a misunderstanding. Not this man, just guilty. I leaned back in my tall leather chair, folding my hands together. When someone gives you the unvarnished truth right out of the gate, you owe them the courtesy of actually listening to them. "Mr. Pendleton," I said, my tone softening just a fraction. You are an 82-year-old veteran. You have an impeccable record. Why on earth are you breaking into a bank-owned property in the middle of the night with a crowbar? He looked at me, his jaw tightening slightly. Because, Your Honor, the bank may own the deed now, but that was my home. I built the back porch with my own 2 hands. I lived in that house for 45 years. The courtroom, which had been filled with a low, restless hum just moments before, suddenly went dead silent. 45 years. You don't just walk away from 45 years of your life without a reason. If it was your home, I asked gently, why were you locked out? Why does the bank hold the deed? He looked at Alain, his hands, the knuckles white as he gripped his wooden cane. My wife, Eleanor. We were married for 52 years. 3 years ago, she was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's, and shortly after, she suffered a massive stroke. She needed round-the-clock medical care, the kind of care insurance doesn't come close to covering. We drained our savings. We drained my pension. When that ran out, I took a reverse mortgage on the house. I thought I had enough time to pay it back. I didn't. He spoke with a quiet, devastating shame that made my heart ache. This wasn't financial negligence. This was a man who had been bankrupted by the sheer cost of keeping the woman he loved alive and comfortable. When Eleanor passed away 6 months ago, the bank moved in. They gave him exactly 30 days to vacate. He packed what little he could carry, surrendered the keys, and left. I understand the foreclosure, Mr. Pendleton, I said carefully, making sure my voice carried through the quiet room. It is a terrible tragedy, but it is the law. You had vacated the premises, so I ask you again, why did you go back? Why break the window? Why tear up the floorboards in the master bedroom? Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't look for sympathy. He just looked at me with those tired, heavy eyes, holding on to that cane. This is the exact moment in a courtroom where the facade drops and the absolute truth of a situation comes to light, a twist that no one ever sees coming. Your Honor, he began, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of a ghost. When you are given 30 days to pack up 45 years of your life, you operate in a blur. You take the furniture, you take the clothes, you take the photo albums, you pack up the big things, but you forget the hidden things, the things that don't have a price tag, but mean more than the house itself. He shifted his weight, standing just a little taller. In 1967, I was deployed to Vietnam. I was a young man, terrified, halfway across the world, in a jungle that swallowed people whole. Eleanor stayed behind, and every single week, for the entire duration of my deployment, she wrote me a letter, every week, without fail. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. I leaned forward, completely locked into his narrative. He had struck a profound emotional nerve without even trying, cutting straight to the universal human fears of loss and memory. Those letters kept me alive, Your Honor, Arthur continued. When I finally came home, we didn't have a safe. We barely had 2 nickels to rub together. So, when we finally bought that house, I pried up a loose oak floorboard right under where our bed used to sit. I wrapped those letters in plastic and hid them there. It was our time capsule, a promise that we had survived the worst of it. He paused, taking a slow, ragged breath. When the bank forced me out, my mind was gone with grief. I forgot about the floorboard. I remembered 3 days after I surrendered the keys. I went to the bank. I called the real estate agent. I begged them for 10 minutes inside. Just 10 minutes to get my letters. They told me it was bank property now. They told me I was legally prohibited from crossing the threshold. Arthur's grip on his cane tightened, his knuckles turning white. They told me to fill out a form, Your Honor, a corporate form to get my wife's soul back. I waited 2 weeks. No answer. Then, I drove by and saw the contractor trucks. They were gutting the interior, gutting our bedroom. I looked at him, feeling the heavy silence of the room press down on us. So, you took matters into your own hands. Yes, ma'am. I broke the window. I went to our bedroom. I pulled up the floorboard, and I took my letters. The police arrived as I was walking out. I looked at the man. He wasn't holding a weapon when the police arrived. According to the arrest report, he was holding a bundle of aged, yellowed envelopes tied with a faded piece of twine. Those letters were sitting right there on the evidence table in my courtroom, tagged and sealed in a sterile plastic bag. 52 letters. One for every week he spent surviving a war, only to come home and eventually lose the one thing he was fighting to get back to. I turned my attention to the prosecutor's table. The bank had actually sent a corporate representative to sit beside the assistant district attorney, a young man, impeccably groomed, wearing a tailored suit, looking profoundly uncomfortable as he shifted his weight under my intense gaze. "Let me get this completely straight," I said, my voice dropping to that dangerously low register that usually makes lawyers sweat. "Your institution foreclosed on this man's home after he bankrupted himself paying for his dying wife's medical care. He legally surrendered the property. He then formally requested permission to retrieve deeply sentimental, personal correspondence hidden inside. You ignored him. He retrieved them himself. And your client's response is to demand full criminal prosecution for a broken pane of glass?" The young corporate representative swallowed hard, leaning into the microphone. "Your Honor, the bank has strict liability protocols. Once a property is foreclosed, it becomes a secured corporate asset. Breaking and entering, along with the destruction of property, cannot be ignored, regardless of the defendant's personal motivations. It sets a dangerous legal precedent. A dangerous precedent." I let those words hang in the heavy air of the courtroom. I have spent my entire career upholding the law. I believe in property rights. I believe in societal order. But if the rigid application of the law is completely devoid of basic human compassion, it ceases to be justice. It just becomes a blind machine that crushes the vulnerable. I looked back at Arthur. He hadn't flinched at the representative's cold corporate speak. He was just staring quietly at that plastic evidence bag containing his wife's handwriting. "Mr. Pendleton," I asked, "did you go there with malicious intent? Did you intend to cause financial harm to the bank?" Arthur shook his head slowly. "No, Your Honor. I brought exactly $850 in cash with me that night. It's sitting in my front left pocket right now. I intended to leave it on the kitchen counter to pay for the window and the floor repair. I didn't want their house. I just wanted my letters." I looked at the young man in the tailored suit sitting at the prosecutor's table. I wanted to see if the sheer weight of what this 82-year-old veteran had just said was going to penetrate that corporate armor. Arthur Pendleton, a man who had lost his wife, his life savings, and his home of 45 years, had broken a window to retrieve his own love letters, and he had brought the exact cash to pay for it. "Bailiff," I said, "approach the defendant." The bailiff walked over to Arthur, who reached into his faded military jacket with a trembling, age-spotted hand. He pulled out a thick, white bank envelope and handed it over. The bailiff brought it to my bench. I opened it. Inside was exactly $850, mostly 20s, some 10s, a stack of worn-out bills that looked like they had been painstakingly scraped together over time. "Mr. Pendleton," I said, looking at the cash, "you told me the medical bills wiped out your savings. You told me you lost your pension to a reverse mortgage. You are living on a fixed, minimal Social Security income. Where did you get $850 in cash?" Arthur swallowed hard. He didn't look ashamed, but he looked deeply tired. "I sold my 1998 Ford Taurus, Your Honor. The used car lot down the street gave me $900 for it. I figured I didn't have anywhere to drive to anyway, not without Eleanor. And I knew I was going to break that window. I was raised to pay for what I break. I didn't want to be a thief. I just wanted to be a husband. I want you to truly process that. Subscribe right now if you haven't, because you need to understand the character of the man standing in my courtroom. He sold his only mode of transportation, his last shred of independence. He sold his car to pay for a window he hadn't even broken yet, just so he could keep a promise to himself that he wouldn't be a criminal when he went to rescue his wife's memory." I turned my gaze back to the bank's representative. The dynamic in the room had completely shifted, demonstrating exactly what happens when corporate privilege collides with undeniable human character. The young man was staring intensely at his legal pad. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at the prosecutor. And he certainly wasn't looking at Arthur. "Sir," I said, addressing the bank's representative directly, my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed off the mahogany walls. "Your client, a multi-billion-dollar financial institution, is demanding restitution and criminal penalties for an $800 window. A window broken by an 82-year-old combat veteran who just handed me the cash he got from selling his last worldly possession. I want you to stand up right now and tell this court if that is still your official position." The young man looked up. His face had gone pale, the polished confidence completely draining from his expression. He stammered, looking toward the prosecutor, then back at me. "Your Honor, the bank's position is..." He stopped. He looked over at Arthur, really looked at him for the first time. The veteran standing there with his cane, the plastic bag of letters, and a worn envelope of cash. The bank's position, the young man finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, is that we wish to drop all charges, Your Honor. We have no desire to pursue this matter further. A collective exhale swept through the courtroom, but I wasn't finished. Dropping the charges wasn't enough. Not when a system had failed a man this profoundly. I appreciate your sudden moment of clarity, counsel, I said, my voice echoing loudly now. Because if you hadn't dropped them, I would have thrown this case out with prejudice and held your institution in contempt for wasting the court's time and taxpayer dollars on an act of corporate cruelty. I turned back to Arthur Pendleton. Mr. Pendleton, the charges against you are dismissed. You are completely free to go. Arthur didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just nodded slowly. Thank you, Your Honor. And the restitution for the window? He held out the envelope of cash. Keep your money, Mr. Pendleton, I said, leaning forward. The bank will cover the cost of their own window. Consider it a late penalty for failing to answer your request. He nodded again, carefully placing the envelope back into his jacket pocket. Then, he reached over to the evidence table and picked up the plastic bag containing his wife's letters. He held them to his chest, right over his heart, with a gentleness that broke something open inside every single person watching. There wasn't a single person in that room who wasn't profoundly moved. The bailiff, a man who had seen decades of crime and human misery, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. The prosecutor stared down at his notes, clearly ashamed of his own involvement. The corporate representative rushed to pack his briefcase, eager to escape the suffocating weight of his own company's public disgrace. Privilege and power had walked into my courtroom expecting a routine execution of the law, but they were entirely dismantled by the quiet, unbreakable character of an 82-year-old man in a faded military jacket. I looked at Arthur Pendleton as he prepared to leave. Mr. Pendleton, I called out before he reached the heavy oak doors. He stopped and turned, his hand resting steadily on his wooden cane. You served this country with absolute honor. You loved your wife with a devotion most people will never comprehend, and you stood in this courtroom today and showed every single person here what true accountability looks like. You are a better man than this system deserves. Go home, sir. Go read your letters. He gave me a crisp, sharp nod, turned, and walked out. That is exactly why I do this job. Because amidst all the liars, the frauds, and the corporate machines that try to grind regular people into dust, you occasionally bear witness to pure, unadulterated integrity. This case wasn't just about a broken window or a trespassing charge. It was about a society that has become so obsessed with strict protocols, property deeds, and profit margins that it has completely forgotten its basic human soul. The bank had the strict letter of the law on its side, but Arthur Pendleton had the moral truth. And in my courtroom, character will always override a cold corporate policy. If you ever think power always wins, if you think a tailored suit and a massive corporate backing make you untouchable, I want you to remember this case. Remember the day a multi-billion-dollar financial institution was brought to its knees by an 82-year-old widower who just wanted to hear his late wife's voice one more time. Power was never meant to be a shield against basic human decency. Thank you for listening. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of what true justice looks like today. Court is adjourned.